Hey Doc, sorry that it's been so long since our last little session. Things have just been really busy. Absolutely, but you know that I'm not a doctor, right? And I'm also not a therapist, because doctors and therapists aren't the same thing. But I'm neither of those. I hope you understand that. Wait, you're not? Then what are you? And also, should I be paying you for this then, if you're not a doctor or a therapist? So to answer those questions in order of importance, with the most important first, yes, you've got to pay me. I have Venmo, I have Cash App, I take cash, and I don't take insurance. And in order to answer your less important question, you see, I am a sort of theatrical construct. I am, in essence, the intelligent and logical part of the content creator's brain, and you are, in essence, the emotional part. You're the part that feels things. You've been given just enough intelligence to be able to have a conversation for the sake of the video, whereas a lot of the dissections of the topics and a lot of the dissections of what you say will be left up to me, and I'll also be asking questions that are meant to make you feel something and that are meant to make the audience feel something as well. And also, so that way you can give intelligent responses, and that way the audience can in turn get to know me better through you. Although, to say that feels like I'm implying that we're two separate people, when in actuality we're two separate parts of the video maker's brain that have been logically split up for the sake of having a conversation, as opposed to having a sort of lecture wherein the content creator just sits in front of a camera and then just talks at it, because that feels inauthentic, and also it's just boring. Can I pay you in exposure or in Twitter shoutouts? No, you cannot. And just before you start to think that maybe it's time for you to get up and go, you're still going to have to pay for the time that you spent here. So you might as well just go ahead, sit down, get comfortable, and let's talk. I guess I might as well. Well, lately I've been having lots of thoughts about the sort of audience that I would like to have as an asexual content creator. Do you mind expanding upon that? Because it's something that I would be very interested in learning more about. I know that you are an openly asexual person who creates YouTube content online. You have had conversations with lots of different folks about asexuality and about demisexuality, and I know that you have lots of dynamic opinions on this. So please feel free to share. Yeah, so something that I've noticed is that if you are an asexual content creator and you create content yourself that is intended for people to use and to learn from, a lot of what you're really doing is you're taking concepts that oftentimes other people have created, and then you are hopefully signal boosting them, and you are helping people to learn more about them. And oftentimes, these are concepts that are deeply valuable to a range of people, including straight people. And it's something that's very odd to me, because a lot of the times when I use these terms to my friends who are not asexual, this is the first time they're hearing these terms. And nothing about these terms is particularly academic or even exclusionary. These are terms that apply to a wide range of different people. Some of the big examples I can think of are terms like romantic attraction, sexual attraction, and aesthetic attraction. And these are terms that every person understands on some level, even if they've never heard there be an explicit term for it. And it's very fascinating to me to hear people see these sorts of things, but something that annoys me about this is that oftentimes this means that as an openly asexual person, what I'm doing isn't really talking about the dynamic and unique lived experiences of asexual folks, but I'm explaining terms that really should be more common, that would help people understand the true sexual spectrum of a wide range of different people, because a lot of asexual folks, myself included, really firmly believe that sexuality is on a spectrum, and that people are at different points on that spectrum at different parts of their lives. While I understand that you're using that to set the stage for grander commentary on the specific issue, I am curious, because what you said is really smart commentary when it comes to the state of sex ed and when it comes to the state of what is considered acceptable knowledge related to the human sexuality, but it doesn't actually directly relate to what you were saying about how you've been thinking about the sort of audience you would like to have as an openly asexual content creator. So can you maybe go back to that a little bit? I don't mean to stifle or overly control the conversation, but this isn't a private conversation in so much as it is you creating something that's going to be seen by a wide range of people. Well, the reason I brought that up and the reason I talked about that for the length that I did is that this is a real concern for a lot of asexual folks who are online, regardless of whether or not they're active and open content creators who create content about asexuality. Because a lot of us are worried that if we create content at first and we have content that's aimed at a wider audience and not just asexual folks, we're going to have to explain certain concepts. And it's true that we do have to explain these concepts, but the question is it fair that we have to? And I'm going to say that the answer to that's kind of no. It's really unfair that these terms that apply to most everyone, that apply to the vast majority of people, not just asexual folks, it's really unfair that we do have to talk about these terms and that we do have to explicitly define them, because a lot of the times these aren't even terms that were made by us. These are terms that are relevant to our lived experiences, but then these are terms that people don't know. And in order for us to have intelligent, nuanced conversations about our own sexuality, people need to know these things. And it's unfair because we don't have to have the same level of base knowledge to be able to have conversations about other members of the LGBTQ/queer community. At the very least, not all members, because there are absolutely some members of the community that we do and that we should have greater knowledge for. And it's good that we're not alone in this, but it's also unfair for all of us that the sort of knowledge that people should have in order to be able to engage intelligently with us is not knowledge that's super mainstream. And the reason I talk about this in the context of the sort of audience that I want to create is that I do want to eventually become friends with very popular other folks who are also asexual, and I do want to work with them. I want to collaborate with them. I want our audiences to have people in common, and ultimately I want to learn from them. I want to teach them, and I want all of us to be able to create a bigger centralized audience and a bigger centralized community wherein we can all succeed together. All right, that's neat. So how is it that you think that you can go about accomplishing those goals? And what do you think needs to be done for the things that you want to happen to happen? I think that a wider diversity of regularly featured asexual creators is something that would be really neat. I think that asexuals collaborating more often is something that would be really neat, especially asexuals who either have an audience or or are in the process of building one up, which is part of the reason why it is that I am going to be trying to create, if not a weekly, then a monthly live stream series featuring a range of different asexual voices. Something else I'm going to be trying to do is I'm going to be trying to get more writing out there that focuses specifically on asexuality, because it's not something that I write about super often unless I'm tweeting about it. And also, I'm going to do my best to be a voice that signal boosts the work of other asexual content creators. Not just secular ones, although I do think that the work of secular asexuals is really important. I think it's important that when I find quality asexual content, I signal boost it and I talk about the creators and I make sure that people know who they are. Because the reality is, I'm far from the only asexual YouTuber out there. Lots of the asexual YouTubers I know of don't often talk about asexuality uniquely, but they talk about a wide range of other things. And I think that that in and of itself is good, because I think that that helps get our content out there, and then people can learn that we are asexual, and then people can start to learn more about asexuality. I know that I have a good number of pals who didn't know all that much about asexuality before they met me, and they met me through means that were unconnected to asexuality and asexual activism. They met me because I'm a political person. They met me because I'm a secular person. They know me because I'm involved with secular groups. And then they started learning more about asexuality through me because I am a relentless voice for the asexual community as an asexual person myself, and as someone who is not quite proud, that might not be the best word, but as someone who's definitely ready to stand up for other asexuals and to make sure that other asexuals are heard in a wide range of different contexts. Because our voices matter, our lived experiences are unique, and people deserve to hear about us, and people deserve to hear from us. And oftentimes, even in queer spaces, our voices are sort of ignored and downplayed. At the end there, you hit on something really important and on something really, really hard. You talked about how it is that asexual voices are sort of downplayed, even in queer-friendly spaces. Do you wanna talk about that for a little bit? Because I know that that's like a really big deal to you, and it's something that you've talked about in the past. And I understand how frustrating it can be. And I think that hearing you talk about this would maybe help people articulate something that they also have lived through but don't know how to properly express. Oh man, I'm glad that this is almost over because, for someone who's not a therapist, you're making me dig up some really heavy stuff here. Well, okay, what I mean when I say this is, one, I don't just mean queer-friendly spaces, because a queer-friendly space can be a space that's run by an ally who is actually an ally. I mean spaces that are run by other queer people, because in my experience, there are a couple of different groups that even in queer spaces get treated very frustratingly, and this obviously isn't something that happens 100% of the time, but this is something that I've gone through myself, and it's something that friends of mine in these communities have gone through ourselves as well. The groups I can think of off the top of my head are asexuals, bisexuals, pansexuals, polysexuals, and gender nonconforming folks. And we're people who either have our queerness questioned. I know this is a very common thing for ace folks because lots of people like to say that ace folks aren't members of the queer community. And some folks like to say something similar about bi folks, but this is usually because people say that we can sort of pass for straight, which is a nonsensical concept. But this is something that I've seen someone named Sarah Z, who is a fantastic YouTuber, tweet and write about in the past, and she articulated it very well. I'll see if I can put up a link to some of her comments on this. But in essence, because people think that those of us who can, if we decide to lie about ourselves, sort of pass for straight, can almost, I guess in their minds, live without harassment. They think that that means that we aren't queer. There are a couple of videos that talk about the question of whether or not asexual folks are even members of the queer community. And these are the sorts of things that really get under my skin. And different members of the communities that I mentioned, not just the asexuals, but also the pan, poly, bisexuals, and the gender nonconforming folks, all of us, not all of us, but many of us have lived through experiences where people sort of question us and where people sort of say that in some cases, especially for people who are demisexual and for people who are gender nonconforming, they see our position as a sort of transition stage instead of as a position that's legitimate, distinct, and separate, and is also a fully formed position in and of itself and not just a stepping stone from one place to the next. And this is also something that I see when I hear people talk about bisexuality, and even when I hear people talk about agnosticism, obviously different spaces. But these are all things that I've seen in real life, and these sorts of things really infuriate me because they minimize the real struggles that people in all of those communities face. And then those are also used as ways to justify not including our voices in spaces, because lots of us are starting to get louder. People from every single one of those communities that I mentioned are starting to rise up, and they're starting to point out that these positions, these orientations, these identities, all of these things are fully formed, unique positions, identities, and orientations that people can come to on their own. And I know that the fact that I even included agnosticism in there might surprise some people. I'm not saying, obviously, the really dumb idea that that would be a sexual orientation. I'm saying that as a sort of example of how this sort of rhetoric can apply and can be found in other spaces. There are so many different layers that we talked about today, and I'm glad that we had the chance to sit down and begin to establish a precedent for future conversations. Also, I hope that it doesn't take you so long to come back next time, because I appreciate these sorts of chats, And just so you know, you still do gotta pay me. And I'm sorry, I hate to be that guy, but like everybody's got to make a living, even theatrical constructs that exist for the purpose of moving a narrative along and exist for the purpose of guiding a fake conversation that didn't actually happen. No, I get it. Before I go, I do have one question. Do you validate parking? Because I really need someone to validate my parking pass. I actually don't validate parking, but I can check to see if your car's still there. So I see it, but I can hear the tow truck coming. So if I were you, I would run